Just a few days, Joe Biden and Donald Trump will face off against each other in their first showdown since the 2020 election cycle. On Thursday, the two men will be in Atlanta to participate in the first of two scheduled general election debates this season. It will last 90 minutes. Both campaigns have agreed for it to take place in a television studio without an audience present. The debate will take place 1 month after Donald Trump was convicted on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records, and just 2 weeks before he's set to return to court for his sentencing hearing. Neither candidate has taken part in a nationally televised debate since their last matchup in the fall of 2020, and recent reports indicate that they are taking very different approaches to prepare for this week's debate. Biden's going to spend several days hunkered down at Camp David, developing plans and strategies with some of his closest advisors. His former White House chief of staff, Ron Klain, has even taken time off from his current job to get the president ready for both of this year's debates. Klain is one of Biden's closest and most trusted confidants. He's also an experienced strategist who's helped nearly every Democratic presidential candidate since the 1990s prepare for the debates. The president's personal attorney, Bob Bauer, will also lend the campaign a helping hand. He'll be standing in as Donald Trump in the mock debates that the team plans to stage in the days ahead. It's a role that he took on to help Biden prepare for in 2020. And a rotating cast of about a dozen other advisors have also been tapped to help the president prepare for Thursday. Meanwhile, here's what Donald Trump told NBC yesterday when he was asked what his strategy is for the upcoming debate.
My strategy is very simple. Make America great again, that's all. Because our country's going to hell. And we're going to turn it around fast. There's no strategy. We're going to turn it around fast.
We're going to turn it around fast. There's no strategy. We're going to turn it around fast. Trump's team has been trying to give off the impression that the former president is not worried at all about facing off against Biden. They say the campaign trail has been enough of a preparation for Trump, and they've got no plans to stage mock debates. NBC's reporting, however, indicates that there's at least some preparation happening in the Trump camp. The former president has held informal policy sessions with aides, advisors, and lawmakers, including the North Dakota governor, Doug Burgum, and Senators J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio, all of whom are contenders to be vice president. They're also discussing how to respond to inevitable questions about Trump's recent criminal conviction and his role in the January 6th insurrection, and how to rein in the former president's rhetoric. Now, that last point is particularly notable. Trump's campaign has repeatedly and often unfairly used selectively edited clips to portray Biden as old and feeble-minded, but Trump is often prone to gaffes as well. During a speech last week, he bragged about acing a cognitive test and then repeatedly got the doctor's name wrong. He's also mixed up Presidents Biden and Obama multiple times before, and even once confused Nikki Haley with Nancy Pelosi. And for those who aren't familiar with Trump's long-winded speeches, his stream of consciousness ramblings are going to sound absolutely incoherent. When his teleprompter malfunctioned at a rally in Nevada earlier this month, Trump went off the script and told a long and meandering story involving an MIT professor, electric boats, and whether he prefers electrocution to being eaten by sharks. At another rally, he praised, quote, the late, great Hannibal Lecter, a fictional character a fictional cannibal serial killer, frankly, featured in the film The Silence of the Lambs. He also added that Lecter is, quote, a wonderful man. And at two different events yesterday, Trump said that he had proposed starting a, quote, migrant league of fighters, a UFC-style sports league that would pit migrants against one another. He added, quote, it's not the worst idea I've ever had. It's a bizarre proposition that also reminds people of his barbaric and dehumanizing position toward non-white immigrants. Trump might feel like he's got the upper hand coming into this debate, but that's largely because he's been stuck inside his MAGA bubble. His incoherent and strange diatribes may play well among his diehard rally-goers, but it's going to be perceived differently by the general public, who might see him simply as an undisciplined candidate leading an unserious campaign. Joining me now is Barbara Rez. She's previously served as an executive vice president at the Trump Organization. She's also the author of Tower of Lies, What My 18 Years of Working with Donald Trump Reveals About Him. Barbara, good to see you again. I wanted to speak to you very specifically about something, and that is these weird rants that Donald Trump is going on. Put aside the stuff that might be fairly deliberate, the dictatorial, authoritarian stuff he says. The other day, carrying on about being electrocuted versus being eaten by sharks. Did he do this when you worked for him?
A little bit, but he was a little saner then, to be honest with you. But yeah, he would make ridiculous remarks. The thing about Hannibal Lecter, it was not like he was praising him so much as he was joking about him. Like, it was funny that Hannibal Lecter ate people. And it reminds me of a time when we had just hired a residential manager, a German guy, and Donald was bragging among us, to us executives, 3 or 4 of us, how great the guy was, and he was a real German, and he was so neat and clean, and then he looked at a couple of our executives who happened to be Jewish, and he said, watch out for this guy. He sort of remembers the ovens, smiling. Everybody was shocked. I mean, I couldn't believe he said that, but he was making a joke about the Nazi ovens and killing people. And that's the way he was. He was making a joke about Hannibal Lecter and eating people as if that was funny, as that was appropriate. He did.
He was a keynote speaker. I always find this interesting at the Faith and Freedom Coalition event yesterday, which is in theory, a religious thing. He made multiple comments about his allegiance is to the Creator and that he answers to God. He talked about the 10 Commandments thing in Louisiana. What do you make of his embrace, seemingly, of religion and the religious right's embrace of him? How come nobody's treating this like the unusual thing that it is?
His embrace of religion is absolute nonsense. I mean, he used to hate Christmas because he had to go to church one day. He was an agnostic or maybe an atheist. I mean, he mocked religious people. He thought they were, super for believing in things that were obviously intellectually to him not true. As far as the right is concerned, the religious right, I mean, I have lived for a long time, and I've always known that these people were fundamentally dishonest, that they were using God and the 10 Commandments and stuff just to promote their own interests. And as far as caring for others, and especially like Black and Puerto Rican children that were starving, and as far as doing anything beyond the limits of their own church, it didn't exist. They had no spirit of love. There was no community. There was hatred. There was always hatred, and it's the hatred that runs the support of Trump, the hatred of gays, the hatred of interfering with owning guns, the hatred of homosexuals. And that's, basically why they are supporting him. It has nothing to do with God. If any of these people truly believed in God, and I unfortunately or fortunately had to go to Catholic school and know a little bit about the Bible, they would see that they're just breaking every law that was ever written.
Let's talk about some of the things people are talking about. There are discussions about Joe Biden's age and whether he has missteps when he talks. And some people are talking about Donald Trump and some of the unusual things he says. Tell me about the difference between the Donald Trump that you're seeing today on TV this week versus the Donald Trump you worked for. Are you seeing something unusual? Obviously, we're not in a position to diagnose things. It's not something one can do on TV. But as somebody who knew him, do you see a difference in his behavior?
Yeah, I do. I see him. Here's the big difference. If you read my book, you can sort of follow it year by year. He used to listen to people. He used to take advice. He used to think that there were others who might know a little bit more about a subject than he does. That is gone. He listens to nobody. He truly believes that he knows more than anybody about anything. So, in a sense, there's no control. There's no controlling him. And he says what comes to his mind, and whatever that is, he thinks it's brilliant to begin with when he says it. And the only time he appears to have been under any kind of control was during the trial, and even then he wasn't really very good. I wish, and I don't know if Biden even thought of this or his team, I wish they would goad him and make him go nuts, because when he goes nuts, he's really crazy.
Well, that's interesting, because you point out that the only time he's exercised any discipline in recent months is when he was in court, where there were absolute threats about what might, something might happen to him, something bad might happen to him if he misbehaves. He doesn't have any structured things coming up other than court and the debate on Thursday. And the debate's not going to have an audience, so he's not going to have that normal thing that he plays off of, right? He likes to play off of an audience, positive or negative. It's just going to be the crew in there, the moderators, and Joe Biden. So what does goading him look like in that kind of environment? What's the kind of thing in this day and age that even gets to Donald Trump? Because some of us believe that he's absent shame. He doesn't have anything that will embarrass him.
I'll tell you one real quick funny story. I worked for him for a long time, and I worked for him because he never turned on me, and then he finally did. And that day I quit. But we were in a big meeting, and he was accusing me of something, and he was ranting, Barbara did this, Barbara. I said, Donald, there are things you can take for that. And he really got crazy. I mean, his face turned red, and it was wrong for me to say that. It was terribly disrespectful. But that's the kind of thing, to get under his skin, to make him feel that you think he needs help. Yes, Donald, it's okay. And if you do, take some pills for this, you'll calm down a little bit. Maybe something like that. The other thing could possibly be his support for the people that committed crimes on January 6th. Maybe if he goes after that, do you really believe it was okay to squeeze that policeman's head in the doors and that kind of thing? Maybe he'll get a little on edge and react. Yes, and the reaction will be great.
Well, from your ears to Camp David, where they are prepping for the debate. Barbara, good to see you as always. Thank you for being with us. Barbara Rez is a former executive vice president of the Trump Organization, the author of Tower of Lies, What My 18 Years of Working with Donald Trump Reveals About Him. An important book always, but yet more important in these days as Donald Trump gets prepared to try and win the next election to become president again.